Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. Ed Clancy of Aid to the Church in Need has an update on how the war in Iran is impacting the area's Christian population. Ed is the Outreach Director of Aid to the Church in Need USA. Ed, great to speak with you again. How are you?
Same as here. I'm doing well, thank you, and yourself?
I'm well, and very grateful to touch base with you about Iran. So, tell us what we know about the Christians in Iran prior to this recent conflict.
Well, the Christian community in Iran is very isolated and small, especially considering, the 90-plus million population of Iran. It's anywhere from 135 to maybe 250,000. There are a good number of other hidden Christians who might have been converts from Islam, who don't outwardly profess that they are Christians because of fear of reprisal. And so the community is small, and for the most part, the known community is isolated into places where the government has allowed Christianity to exist, not necessarily to move about or do anything like that. But the real effects of the war in Iran is everywhere else, essentially. It's affecting the multiple countries that surround Iran in so many ways. Christian populations in many of these places where they're a minority, tourism is a very important component of their economies, of their ability to earn a living, and it's essentially down to zero. And then you have places like Lebanon, because of Hezbollah's alignment with Shia Islam, that they are now targeted and also have been active in fighting back or launching missiles into Israel. So there are places in Lebanon where the small Christian communities, which is, they're very parochial, they're very centralized, are being forced to move away from homelands that they've had for, centuries.
Given how small they are, how much do things like, say, the war, displacement, and political instability affect the Christian community, and not just in Iran? One of the things you highlight, too, is it's also in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Gaza in the West Bank.
Correct. Well, it's sort of an interesting mix of difficulties and opportunities because they're so small. In a sense, they've already learned to exist, in this very, very extreme minority. So these hardships, although it may drive some away, the communities have had the strength to remain in spite of all that they've gone through the past century or more. But then on the other side, you see that there are places in the region. I guess the prime example of, a drastic decrease in Christian population would be Iraq. The turn of the century, around the year 2000, there were well over 1 million Christians in Iraq. Now there are anywhere between 100 and 200,000 left. So we're talking about between a 70 and 85% decrease in the population. But then again, in a place like Iraq, you see that there's this sort of rebirth in a place like Erbil, where the center might have been Baghdad. Erbil has had a lot of progress. Catholic University of Erbil, the first Catholic in name institution of its type anywhere in the Middle East, medical school opening, dental school, things like that. But because they are so young in many ways, just a decade or so in existence, they also are very vulnerable because they don't have that base, they don't have the population centers to keep them going. But once again, Christian communities in these regions, and it is thanks to the support that they get from outside of their communities that they're able to remain. And the chief area of support for them is within the church, allowing priests and nuns and churches and schools to stay and to not leave. In fact, Father Al-Rahi, a Lebanese Maronite priest who was killed just about a week ago, was essentially advised, like many of the Christians, to leave, but he refused to do so. He stayed in his town, and he was actually killed because he was responding to somebody in need after a missile or one of the bombs hit his town in Lebanon. And then there are a couple of other families who have been likewise affected. A father of a few young children was killed, and a young man of about 22 years old was also killed. Another thing that's happening in places like Lebanon is, the places where Christians live, they have centuries-old industries like olive groves. Some of them have wineries. And because of what's happening, they're afraid to leave, because if they leave, they know that everything will be destroyed and they'll have nothing. In fact, we've heard numerous stories of sort of the man of the house, the oldest male of the family, who remain in the houses so that there would be something to come back to, because their fear is that they will lose everything. In places like Lebanon, because of the destruction of the economy through different banking issues, what has happened because of ISIS, there was COVID, there were numerous other attacks, that they have used all their savings just to stay there. So they're really now left to living off the goodwill and the support of communities outside of Lebanon. But they also don't want to live that way. They want to go back to their homes. They want to have businesses. So they're really taking great chances with their lives and to protect them to have a future in this area.
Considering all of that, could you also comment on the safety and general reality of religious freedom for Christians in that part of the world, specifically Iran as well?
Well, Iran is a place where there's little, if no, real religious freedom. Christian communities do exist because of the strict laws of Iran. Mm-hmm. They do not allow converts. They do not allow proselytization, as they call it. So you can't even speak to someone else about Christianity without fear of being arrested, attacked, or even killed. And then you get situations where communities that live together, small Christian communities, live amongst Muslims. If there's an intermarriage between a Christian and a Muslim, the Muslim cannot convert. In fact, the presumption is that the Christian will convert, and any children that are born in that marriage will be Muslim. So that puts, sort of harsh penalties or pressures on the Christians. The other thing is, because Christians in these communities oftentimes that are very well educated. Education is a very important aspect of life in the Christian community. They often are overeducated for their opportunities, which is another draw that pulls them away. And so you have this sort of mix of lack of opportunity, of danger, of lack of freedom, and it really is quite, impressive that they have remained through it all, that they stick to it, because they do realize that leaving is essentially maybe the end of their culture. And then if you go into other places like Lebanon, because the Christians and the Muslims have coexisted for so long, and the Christians are guaranteed a place in the government, there's much more protection for Christianity in those areas. In a place like Iraq, outside of Erbil, it is tolerated, but not necessarily safe to be, a Christian in public. Communities like Erbil, where there are, maybe 150,000, 125,000 Christians in that city, they have the ability to exist in a large enough community that there is a sense of protection.
We're out of time. I was going to ask about, therefore, the reality of displacement and how the Christians are handling that. But Ed, thank you very, very much for joining us to speak about this.
Yeah, Christians remain. That's the whole thing. They don't give up on it.
My guest has been Ed Clancy, Outreach Director of Aid to the Church in Need USA. We've been talking about the state of the Christian church in Iran specifically. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter.